Hope your work week is off to a good start. This is the daily report for Monday afternoon, July 4th, here in capital Seoul. I'm Min San-hee. President Yoon Suk-yeol has stressed the need for global solidarity to address economic challenges. Speaking to senior secretaries on Monday morning, Yoon said there had been cause for solidarity at the NATO summit in Madrid last week in response to soaring inflation and supply chain disruptions. He also urged for follow-up measures to the numerous summit exchanges in Spain, during which he discussed with his European and regional counterparts ways to boost collaboration on nuclear energy, arms sales and semiconductors. Also, according to President Yoon, South Korea and NATO have reaffirmed their commitment against North Korea's nuclear ambitions and on shared values, including freedom, human rights and the rule of law. Seoul's top finance official and the head of the central bank will work together to better tackle the country's complex economic risks. Intentions to this end were shared by Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho and Bank of Korea Governor Lee Chang-yong on Monday, just a day before the country releases its latest report on inflation. Both officials believe the economic challenges facing the country will last for some time. Accordingly, they've also pledged to closely monitor and manage any macroeconomic issues arising from interest rate hikes. As part of efforts to cope with surging inflation, a growing number of people are opting for a change in their consumption patterns to allow for affordable meals and more. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
Inflation has been a hot topic of late globally, and food prices are no exception. To cut their spending, more consumers are signing on to apps that show discounted food items nearing their expiration date.
Recently, prices have spiked and lunch costs have been a burden. So I've been looking for opportunities to buy the same things at a lower cost.
Discount rates go as high as 60% for items that are nearing expiration or are overstocked in certain locations. This benefits both the buyers and the sellers. Consumers buy items at a discount, while companies save the costs incurred from disposing of expired items. Major convenience stores saw a clear rise in sales recently in May when the inflation rate hit 5%. Compared to January, major chains saw an up to 50% increase in sales.
With the rise in consumer prices, many are looking for different ways to save money.
The trend is not limited to just expiring foods. A company that has started a frugal shopping scheme, which sells items that are valued lower than the original price, has become a hit. Sales rose by 279% in May compared to April. The items are picked by employees who make sure there aren't any defects or major issues. Reasons for the low cost usually are due to them being returned items or having small scratches that discourage consumers from wanting to pay full price.
Buying refurbished items or used items to save money is a coping mechanism for consumers during an economically hard period.
The company says this service is only going to get bigger, and consumers will be able to enjoy a wider variety of items at low prices. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Seoul is hosting the seminar on financial development in Asia and South Korea starting on this Monday. According to the Ministry of Economy and Finance Sunday, it has invited central bank and finance ministry officials from 12 Asian countries, including Cambodia and Vietnam, to the seminar. The ministry will share its manuals on economic development as well as financial policy experiences. Now, South Korea has been hosting the program since the year 2006 with the aim of strengthening financial cooperation with Central Asia and ASEAN countries. The seminar is being held face-to-face after being conducted online for the past 2 years due to the COVID-19 pandemic and will be on for the next 2 weeks. President Yoon Suk-yeol's recent diplomatic agenda in Madrid involved a flurry of engagements with his counterparts in Europe as well as the Asia-Pacific region and business leaders in Spain that also called for greater collaboration for mutual economic growth. Our Yoon Jung-min has more.
With President Yoon Suk-yeol now about 2 months in office, bailed on his first overseas trip to Spain for last week's NATO summit, it included the importance of technological cooperation for future growth, according to his spokesperson Kang In-sun, who discussed the president's thoughts on Sunday. Having met nearly 30 world leaders during his 3-day stay in Madrid, Eastern and Northern European countries were much interested in expanding cooperation with Seoul on nuclear energy, green technology, semiconductors, and electric car batteries, fields where they consider South Korea top-notch. According to his spokesperson, President Yoon also said he got a physical sense of the reality of international politics while meeting with world leaders in person. Both Yoon and his counterparts were eager to invite each other to their own countries down the road. Hopes for a greater economic partnership were also echoed in a luncheon with Spanish business people hosted by the South Korean president in Spain, where he pledged to do more so that more Spanish companies can invest in Korea, particularly in renewable energy and other sectors related to the environment.
스페인 경제인 여러분은 이미 한국 기업과 협력하고 있거나 또는 협력 의향을 갖고 계신 것으로 알고 있습니다. 저는 민간 중심의 경제를 늘 강조해 왔고 정부는 기업들이 적극적으로 투자할 수 있는 환경을 조성하기 위해 노력하고 있습니다.
The Spanish business leaders reportedly thanked President Yoon, saying he was the only foreign head of state to meet with them among the world leaders in Madrid for the summit. And meeting Korean nationals in Spain, President Yoon and First Lady Kim Gun-hee were moved to tears listening to a performance by the Spanish choir group Vocal Millennium, who sang Korean songs including Miryang Arirang and Our Wish in perfect Korean. As for behind-the-scenes stories, the top office on Sunday unveiled photos of the president and the first lady enjoying their free time in Spain, taking a walk near their hotel and having ice cream. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
In other news, the remains of Chinese troops who died during the Korean War will be returned to China in September. This decision was made during a meeting between Kim Sang-jin, the Defense Ministry's Director General of International Policy, and Li Jingchen, a Chinese Veterans Affairs official. The two officials met in China and have decided to hold a ceremony here in South Korea to cascade the remains on September 15th before they transport them the following day. This would be the 9th such repatriation. Since the year 2014, South Korea has already returned 825 sets of remains of Chinese soldiers. In Eastern Europe, Russia claims to have made strategic gains with regard to its military offensive in Ukraine. Kim Hyo-sun has mourned these claims as well as fresh pledges by Australia to aid Ukraine.
The Russian military claims it has taken full control of the Luhansk region in eastern Ukraine. Russia's defense ministry said Sunday that the region has been, quote, liberated. This comes as Russian forces say they have captured villages around Lysychansk and encircled the city, which had been the final Ukrainian holdout. Ukraine's military later confirmed that its forces had withdrawn from this city. Addressing the nation, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky acknowledged the withdrawal, but pledged that the city will be retaken with more modern weapons. In related news, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said Sunday, during his visit to Ukraine, that his country will provide additional military support to Ukraine. This includes 34 armored vehicles, a number of drones, and some $68 million.
Australia stands ready to continue to support the government and the people of Ukraine for as long as it takes for Ukraine to emerge victorious in defence of your national sovereignty and your homeland. Because you are fighting for the international rule of law.
He also added that Canberra will be slapping sanctions and travel bans on 16 more Russian ministers and oligarchs, bringing the total number of Russians sanctioned by Australia to more than 840. He also pledged his country would ban Russian gold imports while giving duty-free access to Ukrainian goods. During his visit, the Australian Prime Minister visited war-torn towns of Bucha and Irpin. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of part 1 of the Daily Report. In part 2, we have a panel of experts addressing Seoul's ties with Tokyo following the two countries' attendance at the NATO summit in Madrid last week. Stay with us.
what matters.
Welcome back. On Viewpoint today, we assess Seoul-Tokyo ties following the NATO summit, as well as trilateral talks among South Korea, Japan and the US on the sidelines of that security summit, that is. For more, I have Professor An Jun-sung from Yonsei University. Professor An, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Professor John Nilsson-Wright at the University of Cambridge live on the line. Professor Nilsson-Wright, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Likewise.
Right, Professor An, let's start here in the studio then. President Yoon Suk-yeol and his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida did not hold a bilateral summit on the sidelines of the NATO summit itself, but both leaders have expressed commitment to improving bilateral ties. Do you suppose this shared stance itself looks to perhaps favorably reset our mutual ties?
Yes, well, I think so. Well, that as we discussed, that both parties failed to set up bilateral meetings during the NATO summit. However, they share the same stance. That is to say that they need to improve the bilateral relations between two countries as soon as possible. Also, on the multilateral platform, both leaders had a trilateral meeting with the U.S. government, and they agree on some regional security issues, including North Korean threat, the nuclear threat. So I think that's that on the multilateral side is progressing, and even the bilateral side is getting started. I think that's the good point. It's kind of getting started is a good point, right?
Right, so we are on favorable territory then. Professor Nilsson-Wright, pundits claim a summit between President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida was mostly hindered by political matters over in Japan. Do you agree?
Partially. I mean, we have obviously an upper house election that will be taking place on July 10th in Japan. For Mr. Kishida, the Prime Minister, the support he has within his own party from Mr. Abe's faction, the former Prime Minister, with a strong component that I suppose you would say is fairly traditional on some of these issues about the past, is very important. There is a concern, I think, that if Mr. Kishida is seen to be offering too many concessions to the South Korean side, that might affect the party's prospects in the run-up to this election. So yes, politics always plays an issue, but at the same time, I think there are legitimate concerns on both sides about the way in which the new administration is addressing some of these difficult issues, not least the question of forced labor, which remains a source of concern, both in Japan and South Korea. And therefore, there is politics, if you like, on both sides of the issue. In South Korea, of course, President Yoon has to tread carefully to avoid making the mistakes that were often associated with past administrations when some of these sensitive bilateral issues have become embroiled in domestic politics.
Right, a good point right there. Professor An, according to the presidential office here, President Yoon told his Japanese counterpart that he plans to resolve issues of bilateral concern after Japan's upper house election and pursue a future-oriented approach to bilateral ties. How feasible are these plans given the two countries' historical issues as mentioned by Professor Nelson Wright?
Yeah, actually, I agree with Professor Nelson Wright because there's some issues very sensitive and can cause the public opposition from, not only Korea, but also the Japan side. There's a very long history. Both countries have a long history of the love and hatred, basically. So it's going to be uneasy. Well, you can expect a single, solution for solve all issues, right? But at least, well, I think that what the mission try to solve the issues, more focusing on the future matters rather than going back to the past. But in terms of Korean-Japan relation, it's really historical matters, right? It's really history issues, and which is not easy and very political issues, right? For example, if the Yoon administration tried to make any progress in terms of bilateral negotiation with U.S. and Japanese government, he might have to come up with some kind of compromises because that, in negotiation, you have to give up some of things you think you have it, like Plan B. In doing so, he might face very strong public opposition, just like what happened in past previous administration, and they have to deal with a lot of pressure, political pressure inside Korea, not only the outside. Also, but on the same token, it might be same thing happen in Japan as well. There's an election coming up pretty soon, and then Japanese voters will talking about Tokyo issue also. They're very politically oriented as well. So it's in both administration have to deal with their internal political problems. That's more concerning to both sides.
Right, which is perhaps why Professor Nelson, as Professor An has mentioned, in the absence of a single solution, there is talk about a two-track policy with regard to Seoul-Tokyo ties that has been proposed, through which the two sides are advised to set apart their joint regional security concerns from their differences over history. What are your thoughts regarding this proposal, this proposed dual policy, so to speak?
I think it's a very sensible approach, and South Korean Foreign Minister Park Jin, of course, has stressed the importance of this track 2 approach. It is already in effect happening. We've seen meetings between senior officials below the level of state leaders, below the level of the president and the prime minister. Defense ministers have been meeting. And we've seen, I think, an acceptance that there are so many issues to do with regional security where it's important to have this level of cooperation. Looking ahead to the G20 summit in Bali, it's my understanding that Foreign Minister Park Jin will meet with his Japanese counterpart, Foreign Minister Hayashi, and Wang Yi, the Chinese counterpart. So there are, I think, many fora in which it's possible to have this sort of constructive dialogue, but we can't isolate them entirely from the impact of history because of the role of politics. These are two liberal democratic states, and inevitably leaders have to address these concerns. It's also, I think, fair to say that the symbolic importance of a meeting between President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida to discuss a range of issues will continue to be important. It is a gradual process, and I think, therefore, we have to accept that the pressures of domestic politics will continue to intrude. But I think at the level of politicians and civil servants, there is, I think, clear awareness that these are new opportunities to strengthen the bilateral relationship. Both countries face the common challenge of North Korea. They face the broader issue of regional security. And increasingly, as we saw at the NATO summit, both Japan and South Korea are committed to being fully paid up members of the international community and demonstrating their commitment to address a whole raft of security issues, including, of course, the crisis over Ukraine. So I'm optimistic that this track to approach will actually deliver constructive progress for both countries.
Right. Staying with what Professor Nelson Wright has said, Professor Ahn, some do claim that the recent shifts in global order, including Russia's aggression, China's assertions, if you will, and North Korea's nuclear ambitions, have provided Seoul and Tokyo with fresh momentum, perhaps a fresh opportunity for dialogue to improve ties, that is. Do you share this view?
Actually, I kind of disagree. Actually, it's nothing fresh between two countries. I mean, it's the century-old, maybe a million year, perhaps, because we have a long history, both countries, and very close neighbors for a long time, right? So you have a long history, and something's good or something bad memories, and the deal with about, for example, 1965 agreement, bilateral agreement between two countries, and Japanese side said that they terminate all the claim by the South Korean citizens, even the first laborers. However, from the Korean perspective, even including the Korean Supreme Court decisions, right? They say it's not really prevent individuals going for their claims, right? Individual claim, private claim, by charging by the forced labor workers, right? So that's the issue. Actually, I looked it up. It's very interesting. From legal perspective, there's a very interesting view, because that the Japanese government is arguing that they had a lump sum agreement, means that they have some fixed amount of money pay to whoever the other side, and the deal is over. Well, however, it's a legal perspective. We use that lump sum agreement in the construction contract. You're setting up something, so owner give like a fixed amount of money, and the builder would construct a house or condominium and whatever the buildings they wanted. And however, things that let's think about that some worker hired by the constructor got injured because of the illegal activity by the owner. Is that the owner is not liable for that? Well, I disagree, because that I agree with the Korean Supreme Court case, decision that it does not really preclude the individual claims against the the contract. That the lump sum, even if it is a lump sum agreement, there's some type of rights exist. Whatever they say in the contract, that's the things I see. So things are very complex. But however, the Japanese court look different way, right? Not only the court or the prime minister, their administration will look different way. That's a really big gap. It still remains in both countries.
Right. And given the complexities of this issue, Professor Nelson Wright, what are your thoughts on Washington perhaps seeking a more active role in advancing Seoul-Tokyo ties? Would such a role be seen as perhaps stepping out of diplomatic protocol, do you think?
I think Washington has to tread carefully, in the sense that South Korea and Japan are two sovereign nations, and it's up to them ultimately to make the decision on how to move forward. But of course, they are America's two most important allies in the region. There is a long history of the United States seeking to broker agreements between Tokyo and Seoul. Going back even to 1965, it was the US ambassador to Japan at the time, Edwin Reischauer, who took a great deal of pains to try and improve bilateral ties. And we've seen similar efforts. Even more recently, President Obama, of course, when he was in office, sought to bring then President Park and Prime Minister Abe closer together. And President Biden has invested similar political capital in his separate meetings with the two leaders of South Korea and Japan in May of this year. I understand he made a similar push to try and get the two sides talking more closely together. But ultimately, it has to rest with Seoul and Tokyo. The reason, in part, for my optimism, to go back to the earlier point, is partly a reflection, I think, of the importance of personalities. We have in Foreign Minister Park Jin an individual with a long history of having studied Japan, speaks Japanese, has, I think, an awareness of the importance of the bilateral relationship. And I don't want to minimize the historical issues that my fellow panelist was mentioning. But on the issue of the Supreme Court's decision in 2018, we are seeing an effort by President Yoon through the establishment of this public-private committee to look at the issue. But the administration is mindful of some of the difficulties of being seen to act in a way that perhaps runs against the interests of the plaintiffs in this case, particularly the victims. who would see the offer of potential support from the South Korean government to address those concerns as perhaps stepping in a too interventionist fashion. So I think a lot of this will depend on the response of individual South Koreans and how this plays out in the court of public opinion. And that brings us back again to these difficult issues of public attitudes in both countries. The question of Dokdo also, of course, is part of this broader set of issues. The Japanese media is highlighting the fact that the presence of a South Korean maritime vessel carrying out investigations, its own researches in the waters surrounding that territory, has prompted reactions on the part of more nationalist-minded Japanese. So we need to take into account the broader set of issues. But my optimism is based, I think, on the willingness of the governments, both governments, to try and come up with constructive solutions.
Right. Professor, and meanwhile, it's been 3 years since Japan has imposed export controls on key chip-making materials to South Korea. What have been the implications of these control measures by Japan against South Korea?
Yeah, I think that issue is very interesting because that really brought up the situation, because that it's more like a chicken and egg problem, right? Which one is first? It's a chicken or egg, right? Basically. So the Japanese government is saying that since you do something wrong to us, and we will revenge you something, basically, right? It's kind of a trade, kind of a revenge things that. But if they really want to, improve bilateral tie or relation between both countries, Japanese government also have to do something they don't want to do it, right? Like a plan B, right? They have to compromise. They make also compromise well. I think that's a good sign about their export control is that they lifting their export control is one way they show good gesture to they compromise the situation. So I think that we'll have to wait and see how Japanese government will do it without, I think that they're making something good, something progress in favoring the improvement of the bilateral relations. I don't think it's very difficult for the United Nations unilaterally making compromise. You have to be both sides have to make compromise so they're making progress. I think that's the things that they have to deal with.
Right, they'll have to mutually give and take then. Professor Nielsen Wright, going back to history, within your capacity, speaking that is, within your capacity as a scholar, how do you explain the relentless, perhaps, dispute between Seoul and Tokyo over historical facts?
Speaking as a historian, I recognize that historical facts, we like to think of them as objective and absolute, but of course they're filtered through the lens of public perception. And increasingly we've seen, not just between Japan and South Korea, but in so many countries, disputes over history and about historical identity. Emotion increasingly plays, for good or ill, a more important role in shaping the way in which I think politicians respond to some of these concerns. And that's one of the reasons why this issue has been so intractable. When we think back to 2015 and the dispute over so-called comfort women, I think what was striking was how the Japanese government responded to the intervention by then President Moon, and the perception that somehow by revisiting this issue, South Korea was breaking an established agreement. The Japanese Foreign Ministry has tended to take a very strict legalistic view of the importance of honoring past agreements. But it was in the reaction to this decision that we saw, I would say, some of this emotion intruding into the way political decisions have been made. Mr. Kishida, by contrast, I think is inherently a pragmatic politician and will be looking to find ways to move beyond this difficult period in the bilateral relationship. I agree that there will need to be some demonstrable compromise by both sides. And I think it will take a degree of imagination on the part of all the senior officials to find language and ways of doing just that. And that's why we're seeing, I think, President Yoon focus on this private public sector commission. In July, Foreign Minister Park Jin will travel to Japan for further discussions. And with the election out of the way, I think the Japanese side, and Mr. Kishida in particular, will have much more latitude to think about some of those constructive solutions.
Right. And against that backdrop then, Professor An, what are some variables perhaps that may challenge the Yoon administration's efforts to improve ties with its Japanese counterpart?
Well, it's a very difficult question or very simple answer, actually. Very difficult question because they go back to history, right? And the really crux of the problem in the public, not only perception, the reality is that Japanese government never, says, I'm sorry, right? They never admitted they're wrong in the past. Just unlike the German government, but they did a lot of work and they put a lot of things and they regret on. They actually publish, and then they educated their young generation the wrong they have done to the other neighbors, right? But Japanese never did, and they even recently they just think they're about the textbook. About issues, they are still talking about, they do nothing wrong, even talk, not only talk the issues. I mean, there are a lot of issues they have to really saying that I'm sorry, but they never did it. I think that's really the emotional issues, not only politics, the bilateral relations. So that if maybe it's time for the Japanese government take a different fresh approach, something really, really market future better for the both country. They have to come with something really more using the imagination, I guess, more creative and something really impressed the Korean people, saying that they are changing, so now it's time for us to change as well. I think that's really the things they have to do with.
Right. Professor Nielsen Wright, what do the two countries, that is South Korea and Japan, look to gain from an improved relationship given the current challenges to international order?
Oh, well, there are obviously so many issues where the two countries stand to gain by working together. We've seen the perennial concern over North Korea, with talk of a possible seventh nuclear test. I think trilaterally, the United States, South Korea, and Japan are looking at ways to enhance cooperation. Foreign Minister Park Jin has already stressed the importance of doing more to strengthen GSOMIA, the intelligence sharing cooperation agreement between South Korea and Japan. With Japan, of course, under Mr. Kishida, committed to a review of its national security policy making. By the end of this year, we'll see a new national security statement, a new national defense program outline, big increases in defense spending. Both governments, I think, recognize the importance of a coordinated response to North Korea, but also those broader international security concerns, strengthening the rule of law, managing the relationship with an increasingly more assertive China, while at the same time not framing China in a zero-sum term. Both South Korea and Japan, of course, strong economic relations with China, both in a sense also concerned about the long-term commitment of the United States to the region. President Biden, of course, has strengthened alliance cooperation, but looking ahead to November and the midterms in Washington and potentially to 2024, with the possible election of a more transactional American president if the Republicans win the presidency. That's a long way ahead, but I think in terms of planning, both Seoul and Tokyo have to anticipate that possibility. And therefore, there are many areas where they need and I think will increasingly look to cooperate, and not just in traditional security areas, but economic security. Both countries, of course, strong economic players facing a global economic set of challenges. So I think the areas for cooperation are extensive, and hopefully that will be part of the discussions that frame Foreign Minister Park Jin's visit to Tokyo in July.
Right. Professor Ahn, keeping in mind what Professor Nielsen Wright has just said, Korea shares very strong trade ties with neighboring China. Now, given its commitment to democratic values as shared at the NATO summit, how do you suppose should the Yoon administration seek to navigate its trade ties with China and its obligations to the Western world, do you think?
It's a very interesting question because I looked it up on the news, recent news by the Chinese government. And kind of in the beginning, prior to the NATO summit, they kind of called that Japan and Korea as the cooperation partners, but somehow they deleted the Japanese name. So they kind of differentiated Korea and Japan. So I guess at least from that perspective, Chinese government tried to get to maintain the good working relation with Korea, relatively speaking, than Japan. So it's a very interesting view. And then I think the Chinese government also understands that situation that they have been having issues, international issues, such as a Russian issue. They ally with Russia, and there's many common enemies also. Excuse me. Also, the U.S. government issues about that. We had a Huawei situation before, and then U.S. government, how the U.S. government looking at the Chinese government, the market power also. So that's that. I guess that Chinese government will come close, try to get close to the Korean government because they have to choose, let's say less evil, choosing the less evil from the Chinese government side. They prefer maybe before we go with the Korean government, they have to choose one between two. So, but however, in the Korean perspective, we have to deal with the situation, not only the Chinese issues, there's a Russian issue. Russia is our also neighboring country, and there's a huge market as well. There's a lot of companies, exporting there as well. So it's very, difficult question how to balance it between the, the Western country also, or not only our neighboring country as well. That's the big issues, Commission have to deal with it.
Right, it remains a daunting task then. All right, Professor Anne, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Professor Nelson Wright over in the UK, thank you so much for being with us live at this hour.
Pleasure.
South Korea's daily COVID-19 tally has been marking a tangible rebound in recent days. Authorities on this Monday reported over 6,000 new infections, even amid the weekend factor. Our Choi Min-jung has more.
South Korea is witnessing yet another upward trend in COVID-19 infections. On Monday, the country reported over 6,200 new cases. It's a jump of more than 2,800 compared to the same day last week and is the highest Monday figure in 6 weeks. Over the weekend, the country's daily tally surpassed 10,000 for 2 days in a row. Usually, the figure for this period drops as fewer people get tested over the weekend. But these figures signal a change in the trend. And with cases increasing, concerns are mounting over the possibility of another surge.
The number of infections will increase continuously until winter. Given that the BA4 or BA5 strain becomes dominant, we predict at least 150,000 to 200,000 cases will be reported daily. It's possible to see another large-scale infection like we did when the Delta variant was dominant.
The authorities say there are numerous reasons behind the latest surge.
We believe increased indoor activities and people traveling during summer, waning effectiveness of vaccinations, and new strains of COVID-19 are the main causes.
The number of imported cases is also on the rise. Pundits say this is mainly because more people are traveling across borders with eased travel restrictions. In preparation for a potential surge this coming fall, health authorities are gearing up to closely monitor the country's medical system and ensure there are enough hospital beds for those who need them. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korea has reported its first heat-related death this year. The Interior Ministry says a man in his 40s had collapsed while moving farm produce at a market in Gyeongsang-Namdo province on Friday. He was taken to hospital where he was pronounced dead. The news comes as parts of the region reported the highest temperatures of the year on Sunday, prompting authorities to issue heatwave alerts. They advised special caution for those who are vulnerable to inclement weather, including construction workers, elderly farmers, and senior single-person households. Now, the summer heatwave that will be, which hit Korea first last month, has now caused record high levels of electricity demand. According to the Korea Power Exchange, the monthly average for maximum power usage for June, that is, was 71,805 megawatts, up 4.3% from the same month last year. The record June high also marked the first time usage surpassed the 70,000 megawatt mark for the same month. Analysts have expressed concern that a supply warning may be issued this summer for the first time in 9 years, with the demand for electricity in July and August possibly surpassing the supply reserve capacity. Tour organizers in the southern resort island of Jeju are seeking to make travel to the island more accessible to all visitors, including those who are visually impaired. Our Yoon tells us how.
A group of visually impaired tourists visit a lake on Jeju Island. They walk around with equipment that helps amplify surrounding sounds. As this lake is in the middle of a forest far from the city, the travelers can clearly hear the birds and even the wind. This barrier-free travel program was made for visually impaired travelers to hear and record the sounds of nature on Jeju Island.
I can hear the sounds of nature. I like forests, so this makes me very happy. It's very exciting.
There's also a program to experience a cave. Guided down the steps, the tourists can feel the cool air inside the cave. There's a walking path inside the cave, making the experience safe for the visually impaired visitors. Behind such barrier-free travel programs is the support from travel helpers. They go through training to provide assistance and information suitable for visually impaired tourists.
It was nice that they helped us use other senses like smell or touch to feel what we can't see visually.
After a successful run of inviting visually impaired travelers, the Jeju Tourism Organization plans to further develop barrier-free tour programs. 이은진, Arirang News.
In our feature story for this week, we share with you growing awareness and related activities within public institutions and private businesses aimed at ensuring sustainability on many fronts, of course, including the environment. My colleague Kim Bo-kyung has this extended coverage.
Broadcasting equipment can get too old as time passes by, and news networks that need to stay up to date have to replace their equipment with newer models. Arirang TV recently upgraded its cameras, lights, and mixing desks. But given that the older equipment can still be used not for broadcasting but perhaps for educational purposes, the international broadcaster decided that instead of throwing them away, it would donate the equipment as part of its ESG management.
ESG management means looking at the sustainability or ethical impact of an investment or firm based on environmental, social, and governance factors. E, for environmental sustainability. A company should do its activities to the extent which it can safeguard the environment. S, for social sustainability or responsibility. Supporting social issues in local communities and having good relationships with employees, suppliers, customers, and local communities. G, for governance. Strengthening transparency and pursuing diversity in leadership while being accountable to shareholders. ESG management has become a new paradigm for sustainability, and one expert says every organization and economic unit needs to apply this.
Local governments, public institutions, nations, households, and even individuals should do ESG management. Of course, large companies need to do it as soon as possible, since if they don't, they won't be able to get overseas investment or export their products. Yet, public institutions also need to follow this trend. As large companies are hard to regulate, the government should first encourage public institutions to do ESG management.
Arirang TV put more than 200 items of broadcasting equipment up for donation. 3 public institutions wanted the items, and one of them is Hongbuk-gu District Youth Center.
Using broadcasting equipment donated by Arirang TV, a small studio has been set up in Hongbuk-gu District's Youth Center. It enables students dreaming of working in media companies to experience what it feels like to work at a news network.
We had equipment that was outdated but could still be used. In terms of recycling, we looked for institutions or organizations that would use these. Hongbuk-gu office was trying to have its own broadcasting network for kids in a youth center, so we donated the items. As they weren't capable of setting up a studio, professionals from our news network helped them for 2 months.
With 99 items at the center, students can experience being in a newsroom and find out whether it's the career for them.
I'm working at the school's broadcasting system, and I want to learn how to adjust the cameras and audio.
The Youth Centre is working on lots of programs for kids and young people, and I'm happy that teens are able to learn more about a variety of jobs and careers through media-related programs held in this studio.
Not just students, but teachers at the center also become trainees paired with a team from Arirang TV.
스킨톤을 잡을 때는 프레임 안에
벡터스코프라는 그 계측기로 스크린의 색깔이 어느 위치가 있는지를 정확히 측정하기 위해서는 이제 얼굴이 카메라에 거의 대부분을 차지하게 잡으시면 돼요.
In the future, the broadcaster plans to keep up the training sessions, so the studio can help not just the students but the center's faculty too. This youth center is not the only venue benefiting from the second-hand gear. The National Library of Korea and National Archives of Korea also received some equipment to play old tapes and videos. It aims to use it so people can watch and listen to the roughly 70,000 visual and auditory materials at the library.
Those materials need equipment that can read them, so it is also important to have the reading systems as well. Such devices are hard to get. At this point, getting those tools is a big help.
Any equipment that does not work properly will be displayed in a museum that will be built in Pyeongchang. The National Archives of Korea is where all the document, visual, and auditory materials from public institutions goes to. It will also use the gear provided to play old videotapes and digitalize them for further preservation.
Most of the gear that was offered is for analog videos, which are not produced anymore and hard to get. We need the equipment to play recordings from the 1950s to 70s, so it'll be very helpful for us.
Public institutions and conglomerates are at the forefront of ESG management as they have the budget and capabilities that small and medium-sized companies lack.
Relatively, larger companies try to do ESG management, making committees for that. Public firms are now taking baby steps while small and medium-sized ones are just crawling. They do not have the budget or personnel.
Yet some small firms are also looking at ESG, such as this athleisure clothing brand, which focuses on pursuing zero waste. Fabric that originally would have been disposed of is used to make small products like masks and hairbands. The brand also uses eco-friendly materials that are biodegradable.
보면은 일반 원단이랑 그 원단으로 만든 그 제품들이랑 상당히 같아 보이는데 이제 좀 특별한 원단으로 만들어진 제품이라는 말씀이시죠?
네, 저희가 이제 기존에 사용하고 있었던 일반적인 레깅스를 만들었었던 기본적인 원사와 원단 대비해서 이번에 쭉 검토를 하다 보니 옥수수 추출물에서 나오는 라이크라이 T400이라고 하는 원사를 저희가 활용을 하면서 한번 테스트를 해봤더니 뛰어난 원래 자체적으로 옥수수가 가지고 있는 점성을 가지고 굉장히 뛰어난 이 탄성과 그리고 내구성을 가지고 있구나라고 하는 부분을 발견을 하고 그 부분을 저희의 원단으로 개발을 해서 새롭게 출시한 라인이라고 할 수 있습니다.
Unlike nylon, which takes centuries to degrade, this biodegradable material takes only 10 years. At the same time, corn's viscosity offers flexibility that can match spandex. When it comes to cotton, they use a bio-based model fabric made from spinning beech tree cellulose. Such efforts led them to win the biggest prize at the 2022 KESG Management Innovation Awards. When asked how the staff came up with using such eco-friendly materials, the CEO said they started by making small decisions.
We thought we would have to take a big, deep breath to do it, but when I shared the issues, slowly ideas piled up. Small decisions naturally led us to use the title of doing ESG management. We were not too serious from the start, but rather trying to do what we can.
To other medium and small-sized companies, she says there is nothing to be scared of.
It is okay to let the fear go away. Starting ESG management is not too difficult. Many reasons why CEOs are scared about it is because they think there needs to be a lot of investment, and without high sales, it would be hard to bear the cost. We thought that way too, but with many other partners, industries that have already paved the way, it was possible for us without using too much money.
Well begun is half done. Though the road might seem bumpy, all firms need to start thinking about community, society, and the environment. Once that leads to the first small decisions, it can grow into something that helps make our future more sustainable. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Good Monday afternoon. The unrelenting heat is sweeping through the country, with Seoul surpassing 35 degrees, shattering the previous high for this year. And heat alerts, as you can see, are in place everywhere across the country. So in this extreme weather, everybody is at risk of heat-related illnesses. So be prepared for the extreme heat and look out for your family and neighbors. You might need an umbrella today as widespread showers can't be ruled out. So there could be heavy downpours accompanied by stormy conditions. And also be aware of Typhoon Eri, which is heading toward Japan and will indirectly affect Korea. Well, due to Eri, there is a typhoon advisory issued offshore in the sea south of Jeju Island. So high waves are expected in those areas. So be extra careful of rough offshore conditions. And other effects of the typhoon will be heat and humidity. And the oppressive heat will taper off with the rain in the forecast on Thursday. Until then, frequent showers should continue, which could turn into heavy downpours of up to 50 millimeters per hour. Now let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
Those are the top stories at this hour. Do stay tuned to Arirang News for more of the day's headlines. Thank you for now.